Okay, this is your complete footage comparison between the DJI Pocket 4 and the Insta360 Luna Ultra, which may seem like a weird comparison because one is going to be more expensive than the other, one has dual lenses, one does not, but this has been a weird season when it comes to camera releases. Both of these companies have been battling it out, trying to one-up each other in terms of the information. And at this point, the DJI Pocket 4 Pro doesn't sound like it's going to announce for at least another month or so, thus I'm going to give you that weird comparison anyways, until we can go ahead and compare both of these side by side. Now note that neither of these two companies has sponsored this video. I don't care what you buy, but it should be noted there's a lot of weird things going on in the space between these two companies in terms of how they sponsor videos. In the case of Insta360, they sent me this loaner unit to try out. In the case of DJI, I bought this Pocket 4. That said, DJI has been trying to pay me off to go ahead and go to a Pocket 4 Pro event where they say I won't be able to talk about comparisons or do comparisons like this video right here. Keep that in mind when you start seeing some of those influencer event videos coming out from places like Cancun and Toronto where they wanted me to go. That said, for this video, I just simply kept it simple. I'm going to show you a whole bunch of footage to give you my thoughts as I'm doing so. For example, right now looking at this Pocket 4 footage, it looks really overexposed. I've got all essentially the default settings on it right now. I do have high bitrate set versus the Insta360 video looks properly exposed. Now at some point I'll do a full comparison between these two cameras. I wasn't exactly expecting to have to drop this video today, so I've shortened up just the footage side because they're of course quite different cameras from a functional standpoint. One has dual lenses, one has a removable mode, one costs less, and so on down the list. Now if I back up a little bit more here, you can see how things compare in a wider shot like this, where the yellow isn't so dominant in the frame as it is in those close-up shots. Now, if you've watched one of my videos, you've likely seen me sitting right here. I am technically outside under like a shed-like thing, but just to talk about the images as I'm seeing them on the cameras themselves. Looking at the Insta360 one, I think it looks a little bit more fluorescent, a little bit more brighter, orangey, contrasty, whatever you want to call it, than reality. In the case of the DJI, it looks a little bit more pale than it is actually in reality. At my face itself, I would say DJI is doing me some favors and smoothing some things out. The Beautify filter is not on here at all. It's just the default settings across the board in that 4K 30 setting at the 1x lens. Back on those bikes there, I think Insta360 is doing a better job of making that red bike pop a little bit, but maybe I'm just biased towards making some of those things pop. And that's one of the things to keep in mind when you're looking at these cameras. There's a difference between the true colors and the colors that look better to the eye in a brief moment on Instagram or social media. Most people will skew towards more pop, more color and things like that, even when that's not correct. No better way of seeing that than going underwater with the action cameras between the DJI, Insta360 and GoPro cameras and seeing the GoPro tends to be truer, but DJI Insta360 make a more pleasing look at that underwater footage because they basically nullify out all the imperfections and make it look like some sort of perfect National Geographic film. But that's not always what reality actually looks like. Anyways, back to the footage from these two cameras across a whole bunch of different scenarios. Okay, here we are in the vehicle using, of course, the gimbal and just pointing at my wife. In this case, I don't see a huge difference between the two of them, to be honest. The Beautify filter is off for this one, so it's just, again, just standard issue stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and rotate towards the road in just a second here. There we go, pointing it that way. Both of them seem to be reacting fairly well to both going inside and outside, though keep in mind the roof is off here. The majority of it is like a sunscreen sort of thing there. I would say maybe a little bit more preference for me to the colors on the Insta360 in terms of her face, and maybe some of the outside stuff has a little more contrast to it, but overall not seeing a big difference. Here I put the two cameras on the outside of the window. It's about 60 kilometers an hour for the wind there. No issues with the gimbal. I am noticing the focus does seem to shift on both of them a little bit between the antenna and the outside, which I guess is natural. I didn't expect that to happen, but it is kind of a nice little test to see there. But no issues with the gimbal in terms of the wind at this speed. It would probably be at higher speeds though. Next, looking at that 3x lens. So this is the secondary lens on the Insta360, and you can definitely see the difference there compared to basically just the cropped zoom on the Pocket 4 non-Pro edition. Looks way better on the Luna Ultra. Also the Pocket 4, again, blowing things out quite a bit here. Hey, just a quick note from later in the video. One of the cool things is I don't have to keep the DJI or Insta360 or GoPro gods happy. Instead, I have to keep the YouTube gods happy. And the way we do that is just simply watching the video all the way through. That's the only thing they care about these days. If you could do that, it would really mean a lot to me and help out the channel quite a bit. Okay, so what about running in terms of gimbal stability? But generally speaking, running is all right on these sort of things. You can usually do it for a while, but if you get some sort of big bump or things like that, that's where you might have problems with the gimbal will bounce off. But these aren't action cameras. That's something that many people kind of confuse the two. For example, these cameras are definitely not waterproof in any way, shape, or form. They are barely rain-proof, like a light rain. The general rule of thumb I have between an action camera and a gimbal camera is essentially, if I were to drop it right now, is that camera likely to be dead? In the case of these two things, strong chance. That's what I have dropped my Pocket 3 while cycling at 25 miles an hour, and it's been fine. If I can drop the camera in the water and it dies, it's not an action camera. Now, one of the things I often do in my videos is to hold an object that I'm reviewing up in front of the camera at the same exact distance in the same exact spot. I'm gonna do this one camera at a time because I want to put it directly in front of the camera lens. So in this case, I'm gonna put this up here in front of the camera lens, and it instantly locks that focus on that. You can see my face is still visible here. Even off the side, it's still visible. It's not changing to my face. Now I'm gonna do the same thing over to the Insta360 one here, and it locked that pretty quickly right there, but it is losing focus tracking on that object and going to my face. Once my face is out of the way, it goes back to this. But the moment my face peeks in there, it goes back to my face. Despite the fact that I have no face tracking or anything like that turned on right now, this is where I wish it did a better job of seeing what's in that foreground. So even if I'm here, let's see if I do this, well, yeah, it just does that. So that is one annoyance. Maybe there's some setting I could tweak better, but out of the box, using all the default settings, it just works on DJI, and it doesn't seem to work as well in the case of the Insta360. Just so we're clear, this is what the maximum zoom looks like on both of them. 12x in the case of the Insta360 and 4x in the case of the DJI. It is nuts to see that. They are placed exactly next to each other. This is absolutely crazy. So we do a lot of product shots, of course, in my reviews. This is a good example here. I'm holding it basically just elbow length. So I'm sitting right behind the camera and just holding it right in front of the camera, and no problems from a minimum focusing distance on that 3x lens, so that zoom lens there on the Insta360, looking a little more crispy than the DJI lens. Now, as I noted, sometimes I prefer one versus the other from a color standpoint. In this case, the Pocket 4 colors are definitely looking a little bit nicer than the Insta360, and they are more true to life. The Luna Ultra seems to have like a little bit of a haze going on right there. I'm gonna go ahead and crop in on this though. This is shot in 8K, by the way. So as I crop in on that, basically using the zoom on the unit itself, so not doing anything in post-production, you can see it's definitely clear on the Luna Ultra because it's got more resolution to pull in on. In just a moment, I'm gonna use the other lenses. So in this case, this is the main lens for both of them. And I know 2.9 because that's the maximum it allows you to do on the Luna Ultra. I know it's kind of strange in terms of that before it jumps up to the other lens. Going down to the water briefly for a second here, just to kind of show what things look like in the foreground versus the background. I don't see a lot of difference between these two. They both look relatively similar to me in terms of what I saw out there and what you see on the display right here. Pretty close on both of these. Meanwhile, this is using the secondary lens here. You can see at the 4x zoom setting on both of them, and you can see it is a heck of a lot more zoomed in and more clear on the Insta360 using that secondary lens that it has that the base Pocket 4 doesn't have. Of course, in a Pocket 4 Pro configuration, it would probably look more similar to the Insta360. Now going into the 12x zoom, and you can see just how clear that is. I am like 300 meters away at this point. I am way, way far away from this, and it's looking very, very clear, and that's as far as I can go on the Pocket 4 without just simply cropping in post. But I wanted to show you this as such a good example of where that secondary lens is really, really helpful. Next, a quick look at sunset here. These were kind of like blot, honestly, for both of them. I think, you know, the overall colors of the sky are closer on the Pocket 4, but then when we get to some of the trees here, both of them look sort of weird. Like the Insta360 looks a little bit weird there, so does the DJI Pocket 4. This is in the low light mode, and again, just before sunset, kind of looking up again towards the sun. It's not like a normal thing you do, but again, there's many scenarios where you might do something that's not super normal. From here, we're going to go into some of the night stuff again, using that low mode. These two look pretty similar to me. I don't really have a big difference between these two across the board. Maybe a little bit too much white on the sand in the case of Insta360, but overall very, very close. Here I am on the bike going down this stretch here. I think the colors are a little bit better on the Pocket 4 in terms of that slightly warmer tone that you see there. But again, these are very, very similar between the two of them. So no main differences there, no major differences there in terms of what I'm looking at in terms on the camera or afterwards in the footage themselves. Also no issues here in terms of rotating this to the right or left, that tracking being stable while I'm on the bike and moving through this area here, it's no problems there. This next section is probably my favorite, out onto this pier. Wait in just a second as it goes dark and watch and see how these quickly adjust to that. So the lighting ends around about 2 seconds, there we go. And then it should be basically pitch black here, but both of these pull a lot of light that doesn't exist. And that's kind of one of the fun things, or funny things, however you want to look at it, of a lot of these low light modes, is they are making it look way, way brighter
than it really is. In real life, that is basically pitch black out there. And then even here on the kind of beach areas and whatnot, it's way darker in real life. Yes, there's light on the boardwalk, but it's covering that area there as opposed to covering the entire beach. So this is where these cameras are just pulling light out that doesn't exist and making that image look really appealing to the eye, but not necessarily what it looks like in reality. Heading back here again, both these cameras were way overexposing this across the board. Again, it might look nice to you, but that's definitely way overexposed in both scenarios. Once we get closer to the buildings here, then things kind of normalize a little bit more. Okay, from here we're gonna go in onto the streets. We're gonna follow this taxi for just a second and then bail off under some buildings and whatnot to get some different coloring of lights there. So here goes that churn. This all looks pretty similar to me. I mean, you can have like minor nits one way or the other, but this looks pretty good. I don't really have any complaints on this section. I'm gonna show you some bits where I'm facing myself in just a second here, but this is very, very similar on both of these. Both of them did a pretty good job, again, using those base lenses on the main camera there.
Okay, here I am talking to the camera, in this case, just basically arm length away. See how the coloring looks, again, in low light mode right now. So there we go. It's slower on the tilt on the DJI, but pretty similar overall.
Now one more dark section here. The coloring on this from a lighting standpoint is really in between these two. It is yellow, to be clear on this. That's just kind of the lighting tone that the lights up here have, but it's definitely in between these two. It's not as yellowish as the Pocket 4 and not as pale as the Insta360.
I'm now about a meter away from the cameras on these two looking at it, basically almost one arm's length away. And then here I am now like 2 feet away, so 2/3 of a meter in, again, low light mode. And now I'm like a foot away at best, so about 1/3 of a meter away from it in low light mode. Backing out here.
And again, one final wide shot here before we wrap things up. Again, these are both simply wrong across the board. It's basically in the middle of these two, but it is neither of those two. Okay, with all the footage gone through, keep in mind there are so many features on these two cameras that make one better than the other. Also keeping in mind it's a weird comparison because we're talking dual lens versus single lens. Insta360 says their single lens version is still some number of weeks or so away before they release that. And DJI officially isn't saying anything, but unofficially it sounds like the July timeframe for the release of the Pocket 4 Pro. At which point I'll do a proper comparison between both levels of those cameras as opposed to this weird one in between. Anyways, hope you liked it.